everyone, thanks for joining our live streaming session today on the evolution of managed services. I'm really excited to welcome our speakers today, John Powell, SVP of Managed Services at Meriplex, and Robert Hilliker, MSP Strategic Consultant with Meriplex. Robert, ready to kick this thing off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Macy, and thank you everybody for joining us here today, taking some time out of your busy calendar, and certainly all the plans you have probably for Labor Day weekend. I know I have some. I'm sure John does too. So we're going to talk a little bit about, very briefly, about the evolution of managed services and how that came about, and how we really got to where we are today. So first off, to understand, we really kind of have to go all the way back to the 1980s. Yes, the 1980s, when we were really starting to get into computers. I'm sure a few of you had your first computers somewhere in the middle of the 80s. Mine was an AT&T 6400. It had dual floppies. So, John, you've been in the industry quite some time, and I know that there was a real shift that happened in the 90s as we started to really see the network take off, and then we had this thing called the internet come along. Can you give us a little understanding of that experience?
Yeah, so back in the 80s, you have to remember, as old as we are, we were doing punch cards in college, and then, by the time we graduated, we were on the dual floppy IBMs. But in the 1990s, the technology was extremely expensive, especially in the IT consultant range. And then, of course, with the advent of the internet, everything took off from there. And then by the time, you reached the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s, you actually had the initial, essentially the first initial MSP providers, which started out with basically an on-site service contract. So, your initial taste of managed services was an actual on-site managed services contract. So there were no management tools. Everything you did was, updates were done by floppy disk. There were no sites that you could go to actually support customers via the internet. And, if you were to go back to that world today, everybody would be completely lost because we just don't have the resources available. We didn't have them available back then as we do now. So as we move forward, we're in a much, much different world.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, John. And I know that you spent a lot of time in the field yourself, and we really saw a shift happen sort of around 2006, 2007. A lot of companies started getting involved in what we were calling, managed services. These were managed desktops, really taking away a lot of the firefighting that was going on for IT teams out there, where they had to go and patch and do all these different things to secure the desktops and laptops. It was really in the birth of the cloud that we started to see some real shift. I know you were involved in that transition. Tell us a little bit about that, John, just the transition that you experienced there from 2010 to the present time with the advent of the cloud.
Yeah, so, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but, back in the day, the cloud actually did exist, but it was called the application service provider model. So, which actually started in financial institutions, believe it or not, where a lot of the apps were delivered from a data center, either directly via point-to-point connections or secure VPN tunnels back in the day. So, that was the application service provider model. And then, of course, as we move forward from 2010, with the advent of what they call the public cloud, which are what we know now as the AWS and and the Azure cloud from Microsoft, is what you're seeing a lot of today. And there's multiple types of cloud that we refer to. We've got the public cloud, we have the private cloud, which would be more of a private data center offering, that, for example, like the IaaS platform that Meriplex offers. And then you have a hybrid, which is going to be an on-site private virtual cloud at the customer site, and then a mix between that and the public cloud. So the way that the dynamics of this has changed is, of course, with when you start throwing security in there, it's a complete game changer, because what has happened now is, with the advanced security attacks that we have going on, it's caused us to change the complete design of how we talk about cloud and how we're going to move forward with recommendations.
Yeah, excellent. And John, I know there was a question that came in, and it was, what's really been the main cause of this shift and increase towards managed services?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The biggest shift is because, when you take your traditional IT staff, who is mainly support to the organization now, they don't have time to actually delve into the technologies and get the actual training they need to keep up with the complex IT systems of today. So, back in the old DOS days, before Windows was invented, it seemed complicated back then, and we went into Windows and things got to be much simpler. Well, now we've gone back in the other direction. We've gone from, what appeared to be fairly simple to much more complex. So, you have more complex networks, you have more complex operating systems. Now with security in the mix, your multi-factor authentication, your TrustX and TACX integration. I mean, it's made things a lot more complicated. So, and of course that now goes from the application layer all the way through the stack. So things have gotten a lot more complex. And honestly, the on-site IT staff has a significant challenge. One is, keep the users happy, keep the management informed. Has turned out to be a large part of their job with recommendations to where they don't have time to get in the technology. And that's why the managed service providers become a great resource and value, to the managed services. To the local IT staff. And that is something that we like to do is we like to partner with those on-site IT staffs to help augment the knowledge gap that they might have.
I think you just answered another question we had, regarding the IT staff and how they are supported. I do want to touch on a couple of things, and we do have a slide that speaks to that. The reason why we've really seen a growth in the managed services space. On this particular slide here, in terms of the technologies in the cloud, as you can see, everything used to be on premise, and when it was on premise, you had to have folks that were involved in every one of these disciplines, and you had IT staffs that were able to manage it when it was quite manageable. But as we've started to see very sophisticated types of attacks that come in from a security standpoint, software that is now moved away from the network, resources that are now more cost effective to acquire. And of course, one of the greatest things to come along in the creation of the cloud was VMware's virtualization software, which made it possible for us to live in a virtual world, a world that did not exist within our four walls. And so we've definitely seen that migration. And as you can see, an on-premise solution, everything is there. A SaaS solution, everything is completely in the cloud.
Correct. And it's real important also to remember that cloud does not mean more secure. Okay, that don't mix a more secure environment with a cloud, because just because you've relocated to the cloud, or you're running a hybrid where you're running maybe your disaster recovery in a cloud and on-prem type mix, the information in the cloud still has to be protected. And so you've got to wrap some security around that, either cloud security, typically when you're talking about Azure and AWS, mixed in with their offerings, because you're not getting the security you would expect like you have on an on-prem system versus a cloud system. So.
Right, and accessing that data and being able to utilize those applications that are in the cloud also poses security threats just from the end users and where they're accessing from. We've become so accustomed to ubiquitous Wi-Fi out there, everybody logging in at a Starbucks. They don't realize that there's threats everywhere you look, and there's somebody that might actually be looking at what you're doing right there at the Starbucks. So endpoint security is also very important in that regard. So this slide here is really just talking about the projected growth of managed services. So currently we're sitting somewhere around 190 to 200 billion industry, and it's projected to grow over the next 3 years to a $282 billion and as much as a $400 billion by 2020, 25, 26. So in that growth, John, where do you really see the services being really mostly driving that? What services do you see driving that growth for managed service providers?
Yeah. So, there's two things. One is the big one I talked about before, which is the augmented service for existing IT staff. But as we move forward in the economy and as things start to get more automated and with the advent of more automation with AI, what you're going to see is companies reducing IT staff to typically the more planning type of staff members who plan and are visionary, and then all of the functional portions of the IT work that has to be done in the organization will be pushed out to the managed service providers. We see a lot of that coming already. So, to where you've got higher level IT staff that are doing the planning and in the conceptual design work, and then they're outsourcing to the managed service providers the design and the functional management and maintenance of the systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really see this as just kind of the 5 C's of what's driving managed services. This kind of speaks to some of what you were talking to earlier, and the complexity of the environments that we're dealing with now, the types of technologies that are currently available, and then the technologies that are emerging. That has a level of complexity that no one group can really keep up with. You really have to have experts in those areas, and you have to be visionary in terms of being able to see what's on the horizon. I know Mariplex spent a great amount of time looking at SD-WAN prior to actually bringing SD-WAN as a core product. What's been your experience as far as the complexity out there? I think you've alluded to that.
Yeah, so the largest portion of the complexity in IT staff and challenges we have now is security, obviously. Security has gotten incredibly complex because security is driven not only the protection side of the business, but it's also now gone in and changed the design of the network. The actual design of your network now, security plays in a factor where everything we design, everything we put in a network now has to, have security as a mindset. So now that when we design switching networks, we design, from the user endpoint all the way out through the gateway to the cloud. There's a security, design in place that goes behind that, especially from the Mariplex side. All our services now we wrap around our security, because at this point we're starting to see that the attacks are much more sophisticated, significantly more, and we've witnessed that as a company as well, where these guys are really good at covering their tracks and worming their way into the network.
No, absolutely. And, as a managed service provider, we are one of those major attack points that, why go to one outfit when you can go to an outfit that supports multiple networks, right? And try to break that. So yeah, we've definitely witnessed that. The next piece in this is just overall consumption. The consumption that we have as a technology consumers is just off the chart, right? No one really projected that we were going to be eating as much bandwidth, that we were going to be, using applications to the level that we are. I know certainly everybody that has an iPhone or an Android, sits on that phone a great deal of time, and the expectation is that it just works, and when they push a button, it's instantly available. The complexity that goes on behind that, and the amount of bandwidth that's being consumed across the board is off the charts. And in terms of security as well, we have a great deal of concern there as a network. So the competencies. Tell me a little bit about where you see folks really having to focus? I know security's been a key piece here, but where do you see people really having to put some focus on in terms of competence and what the expectation is, especially for being a competent MSP? What do you think that takes to be a competent MSP?
Yeah, so typically, the IT environment, you used to be able to use the word jack of all trades, where typically if you were semi-expert or knowledgeable, you could actually put together a decent system that would function for the business. But today it's much more complicated. So what we're finding is you have to have specialists in each type of skill set or practice that's required. And one of the things we do here in Mariplex, of course, is we make sure that we're keeping competent and highly skilled people per practice in the environment as a competent MSP, because what ends up happening is you have to bring all those skill sets together to come up with a complete, secure design. When you're designing a complete network based on security, functionality, performance, all those types of compliance, as we talk about for some businesses going forward.
That's excellent. Thank you, John. And yeah, speaking of compliance, it used to be that just the large publicly traded companies had to worry about governance and compliance and had to meet certain regulations. Now it's down to every network. If you're a company that does transactions online, if you're a company that takes credit cards, if you're a company that stores any data that might have any significant information on it, you're subject to those same risks that every other company is out there that's publicly traded. So it's really affecting everybody in terms of risk mitigation and maintaining compliance. So how do you think that managed service providers help in that regard?
Yeah, so on the compliance side, there's multiple types of compliance. I mean, you have compliance on the security side, like you're talking about. If you're an online reseller, you might have PCI compliance, which they've gotten a lot more strict on delving down into your practices behind, what they call behind the gateway type security, which would be on the local area network. And then, of course, you've got government compliance. And you've got financial compliance, HIPAA compliance, NERC compliance if you're in the power industry. So we see a lot of different types of compliance out there, of which all require, different types of tools that we have to use to put all these networks together to meet the compliance piece of the business. So, one thing we do that can actually help with that is we've got in our managed service provider, we've had to break up our standard contracts into what we call granular contracts, because the client's needs from client to client, if they're compliant or non-compliant, require so many different types of requirements from a contractual standpoint, is where we've actually had to break up our contract into to where it's more of an a la carte, to where we can actually meet the client's needs by giving them selections and options to go in and pick what they need and what type of compliance, for example, they might want, whether it's compliance or non-compliance, specific services, non-specific services that might be needed. So that's something that's affected us as an MSP to make sure that we can provide that value to our customers.
Sure. Excellent. And then just to address the last piece here is this idea of capitalization. There was a time when everybody would go out and buy the network. You'd buy the servers and you'd buy the software, and it was shrink wrapped, and you'd buy the workstations and all the switches and hubs and everything else. As time's gone on, and as we've seen the refresh rates reduce from 7 years to 5 years to 3 years to, I think every year now we get a new WYSIWYG. What are your thoughts in terms of Capex versus Opex? Capitalizing to buy this gear, or doing some type of an operating expense where you're really bundling it all together: the hardware, the software, the service, the communications, and all of the other facets, and bringing those together in more of an operating expenditure on an annualized basis. What are your thoughts there, John?
Yeah, so Capex versus Opex is strictly a business decision. Today we're in a very tax-friendly or corporate tax-friendly environment. So, there's going to be an advantage depending on how the business charter is set up to whether they go Capex or Opex. So, for example, I get a significant write-off if I'm a business, if I do a Capex expenditure. So, what ends up happening is I'm actually, diverting tax dollars to help me grow my business in a Capex model. The Opex model is attractive if, for example, I'm not, I may be a business that from a cash flow perspective, I don't have a whole lot of money sitting in the bank, but I can cash flow and I cash flow a lot. Then you might want to look at an Opex expenditure, because on the operating expense, if I'm cash flowing, it meets the business objective much better than a Capex would be, because I'm not having to expend cash that I don't have, to buy the equipment. So those basically are completely dependent on the business model and in the operation of the business and how they cash flow. But that's basically the differences that we run into and we see when making that evaluation. And from the Meriplex side, we offer, obviously the Capex solution, but from the Opex side, we offer that within our contract. So, if you run a managed services contract with us, we have the ability to actually do what we call a device as a service option, to where we actually loop everything within the contract monthly cost to the customer. So, they want a managed service contract, but yet, they got to do refresh on their storage. They need, WAN equipment. They might want to expand into additional PCs, because they're outdated there. And then, of course, go from there to maybe SD-WAN solutions or even security. We offer a device as a service, which is the pure Opex model, which includes all the services and the hardware.
Yeah, and from the standpoint of how it's positioned anymore, in the Opex component, that actually is very fluid in that you can actually keep pace with best of breed and technology.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep fluid with emerging technologies and introduce those into that model without really disrupting or increasing your spend significantly. So it's a way to stay current and to be able to stay very fluid with the technology industry as it evolves and has been evolving. So that's to say that if you buy a whole network, that network literally could be replaced without any significant financial impact. It just continues business as usual, your monthly recurring cost and so on. And the managed service provider will go in and provide those changes inside the contract. So.
Yeah, and on the Opex model, of course, there's a sweet spot in there as well. So, you typically wouldn't do a 1-year Opex model or a 2-year Opex model. You'd be looking at a 3 to 5 year Opex model with a contract, just because your monthly expenditures get to the point to where if you shorten the contract too short, you're better off going with a Capex model at that point, because you end up spending more on an Opex.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So we got a question in, what's the potential downside of running all of our in-house IT or running the IT in-house, even if we have a staff of about 10 people?
Yeah, so this is a question I get quite a bit, and the answer to this is twofold. One is, if the business is not budget constrained, if they're tight budget constraint, typically you want to look at an outsource model, because a small business of 10 to 20 people may have a single person on their IT staff, and the small business typically puts a lot of faith in that person, puts a lot of trust in that person, and if they end up leaving, they take a lot of institutional knowledge with them, which can leave the business hanging. So what we offer from the small business side is we want to make sure that not only do they have access to the breadth of knowledge we have, but we're not only best practices, but if we have a person leave here, we don't have one specific person or technical staff tied to the business technology. So it basically spreads out your liability and shrinks that liability significantly.
Yeah, that's you're absolutely correct there. So what we're looking at here is in terms of the Mariplex offering and what we put out there. The fact is that with a managed services provider like Mariplex, you're going to get a 24/7, 365 monitoring and management of your network. It typically is at 3 o'clock in the morning that a circuit goes down or that you lose some component, and that's when we're awake and responsive. Oftentimes our customers will comment that they didn't know anything had happened until they read the email that let them know the log and what had been done. Also in terms of the cybersecurity support, I think that's a huge piece. We've got a great cybersecurity team here, and they're very involved and very busy these days, especially with everything that's been going on. People moving out of their physical offices and going remote. That has caused some areas of concern for some companies in terms of intellectual property leaving the premise. So there's a question here: how does MSP typically help reduce costs for the customers? Is it normally a reduction in Opex? I think.
Yeah, so that's a fairly easy one to answer from the standpoint. If you take a small company or even a larger company and you add up the cost of the entire IT staff, depending on what size it is, and then you put in the benefits behind that, all SG&A costs that are associated with that, you're going to find out that typically on an outsource model, it's going to be significantly cheaper to run your IT budget and IT costs from that standpoint. So typically what we find out in small businesses actually get the largest advantages as they get larger. Of course, it's an evaluation and it's a math problem. But for sure, for the smaller, small to mid-sized business, the more outsourcing, the better. And of course, like I said, with our model, we definitely want to have some minimal IT staff at the customer site, whether it's a high level or somebody who is at a medium level, because that basically the combination between that person and us is the best outcome for the company from the standpoint of a planning and strategy type decisions. Based on the business direction and what they're trying to accomplish, because most businesses are not necessarily keyed in on technology. They want to use technology as a tool. So
Excellent.
We want to make sure we keep that in mind.
That's fantastic. Thank you, John. Thank you for joining us. So here are a few takeaways that I think we just need to ask at this point in time. Rich, is your enterprise really keeping pace with technology? That's the question, the number one question. And what we find typically out there is that no, it really isn't. But it's never too late to start that process of migrating to the technologies that are available now and that are significantly more effective. The other is is your IT team spending way too much time putting out fires? I think you alluded to that as well. You really want your IT now to be doing the business of the business that you're in, and not so much time fixing things that are broken. And so technology is great, but it relies on physical assets, and those physical assets break. And then have you fully evaluated the true cost of ownership regarding the technology that you're using today? I think that is a question that every company needs to ask, is what's been the overall cost? I was just on a call earlier, and a day of lost production was $60,000 in revenue. That needs to be bundled in to the true cost of the technology. So that's all we've got for you today. I appreciate everybody being with us. Post-COVID, what are the challenges? Obviously, is it's like herding cats. We're managing folks that are now remote from the office. They're requiring skill sets that they don't necessarily possess in their home. Although if you have a 14-year-old there, there's a good chance you've got an IT tech available at your disposal. However, for the most part, most of the parents that I'm talking to out there are living on Zoom and trying to educate their children at the same time through that medium. So it's a challenging time that we're going through right now. And so last question is, can Mariplex offer managed services globally? We have partnerships, and John, you might want to speak to this.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Robert. So the short answer is yes. We actually do that. Now, when it comes down to 24/7, when we have different time zones we cross across the country, we actually partner with various teams across the globe. We actually have a partner that's sitting over in the UK right now that we use to speak different languages. So, for example, when we have a language barrier, whether it's French or German, we actually partner with other companies that we have relationships with to translate that for us, and also to provide, typically the L1 service, which is the entry level type service for those, and then they'll escalate to us based on the complexity. But the big plus there for us, of course, is the language barriers that are brought down based on the fact that we have somebody who can speak the native language. So those are some of the challenges that we have, but that's how we've also overcome those.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here today. My name's Robert Hilliker. I'm a strategic consultant here at Mariplex. Very excited to bring this kind of information to you. We continue to do these webinars. We've got a lot on the calendar. Please join us again and listen to one of our webinars. You can also see this in replay if you missed any of it. So want to thank you all for joining us. And this has been Mariplex, John Powell, and Robert Hilliker talking about the evolution of the managed services. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.